Hello everyone and welcome back to these sessions on Advanced Strategic Financial Management. Friends, in continuation to the topic Advanced Capital Budgeting, now we have come at a quite far part of this topic. In this class, we are going to deal with conditional probabilities. So let me remind you, in the earlier class, we have dealt with dependent and independent cash flows and learned how to evaluate risk of any project through standard deviation of NPV or through standard deviation of EVCF. We have also learned application of Hiller's model. Now here, when we are dealing with conditional probabilities, this is going to become a platform for learning yet another concept in this chapter, that is dealing with real options. But conditional probability is one of the very interesting areas. Initial couple of examples that I'll give you for understanding conditional probabilities may not be required from examination viewpoint, but for initial understanding of what are conditional probabilities and how do you apply them, these examples, I would call these as good examples, important examples from your understanding viewpoint. So let us initially take up couple of examples which are based on building your understanding with respect to conditional probabilities, and then we go to the exam level questions. So please write this heading in your notebooks, conditional probabilities, and to understand the application of conditional probabilities, we directly get started with one of the examples given in question number 25. Now let us read this question. Mr. DJ has been allowed maximum 3 attempts for qualifying final exams conducted by ICAI. The probabilities that he appears in the 3 attempts are as below. First attempt 0.9, second attempt 0.8, but what is the condition given over here? If he does not qualify in first attempt. That means the only way that he is allowed to give second attempt is that he must fail in the first attempt. Now, when he is attempting the exam the third time, the probability of that is 0.7, but the condition is if he does not qualify in second attempt. So, qualifying in first attempt, second attempt or third attempt, either way, that qualification will actually not allow him to give the exam the next time, and actually who will give exam once again after becoming a qualified CA, correct? Now, mind it, these are probabilities of him appearing in the exam. That means if 0.9 is the probability that he will appear in the exam, 0.1 will be the probability, that is 1 minus 0.9, 0.1 will be the probability that he does not appear in exam. So if he does not appear in exam, end of the journey. If he appears in exam, there can be 2 possible outcomes, either he pass or he fails. If he passes or fails, for that the probabilities are given over here. Probabilities of passing the exams in each of the attempts on individual basis are given. Now guys, one thing that I want you to understand, that probabilities when these are informed, are these overall probabilities, individual probabilities or cumulative probabilities? You have to be careful about that. For example, here in this case the probabilities are given on individual basis. That means for each exam attempt, for the first attempt the probability of passing is 0.65, so the probability of failing will be 0.35. In the second attempt, the probability of passing is 0.8, so probability of failing will be 0.2. In the third attempt, the probability of passing the exam is 0.9, probability of failing will be 0.1. You are required to find the probability that he becomes a qualified CA. Now over here, our candidate Mr. DJ, we don't mind whether he becomes CA in the first attempt or second attempt or third attempt. He should qualify, that is the objective. Now see what happens. him qualifying in the first attempt or him qualifying in the second or third attempt, these would be mutually exclusive situation. That means any one of these can occur. So you find the probability that he becomes CA in the first attempt, then find separate probability of the path that he becomes CA in the second attempt, and then you find the probability of the path that he becomes CA in the third attempt. None of these paths are going to occur together because these are mutually exclusive outcomes. And what you should do, you should make a tree. Generally we call it as a decision tree. Now I would call it not a decision tree over here, but a tree of outcomes. I'll tell you why. Because at every time the candidate is required to decide whether he wants to appear in exam or not to appear in exam, it is the choice of the candidate, and there will be a decision making point. There will be a decision making situation. Over here, the question hasn't given you the scope to decide. Question has directly given you a probability because you are not the candidate. You are being given information about some other candidate named DJ. As a result, you are not DJ when you are solving this question, keep in mind. So you should identify that each decision point, which could be deciding to appear the exam or deciding not to appear the exam, instead of that decision, the probability is given. So whenever a decision is to be taken, then it is a decision tree. But when there are defined outcomes, then we call it as a tree of outcomes. You should first draw a tree. The flow of tree should be horizontal, that is from left to right, and based on what we have learned in dependent and independent cash flows, you already have a bit of idea of how to deal with this. The new point over here is conditional probabilities are getting associated in the situation. So I'm going to help you understand how to prepare this tree of outcomes and how to solve this question on overall basis. So please carefully look at the solution. Now to start your tree of outcome, you begin with the first attempt titled as A1. There may be two possible outcomes. Either he appears the exam or he does not appear. Look at one thing. If he appears the exams, then the outcome is not the final outcome because two different possible outcomes may arise from here, that is either pass or fail. But if he does not appear, it is the end outcome marked as the first outcome, which is not going to result into a success. So we declare this as a situation of no CA, and the probability of this outcome is 0.1. It is basically the same probability that he does not appear in the first attempt. Not appearing in the first attempt makes him not eligible to appear in second and third attempt as well, because the probabilities of appearing the exam in second and third attempt will be subject to appearance in the first attempt first of all. So if he does not attempt the first one, if he does not appear in the first attempt, he will not be given any further chance, and that is why we have concluded over here no CA. On the other side, if he decides to appear in the first attempt, there can be two possible outcomes: either pass with a probability of 0.65 or fail with a probability of 0.35. Once again, look into the aspect. If he passes, there is a defined outcome as outcome number 2. It is an end outcome because this will be end of the journey. If he passes, he gets qualified, then no further attempts will be needed, correct? So at this stage we declare that he becomes a CA. Now what will be the overall probability of he becoming CA in this first attempt? For this, what is the path probability you try to identify? First of all, he should appear and then he should pass. So appearing probability is 0.9. On top of that, the passing probability is 0.65. So 0.9 into 0.65 will give you 0.585. That becomes the probability of him passing in the first attempt, which we have identified as outcome number 2. Outcome number 2 is CA. Outcome number 1 was no CA. Once we have reached the end outcome like outcome number 1 or outcome number 2, the journey ends over there. But look at this point. If he fails in the first attempt, it is not the end, because here again another decision making situation would come, and that is the second attempt A2. Now over here the candidate would have to take a decision whether he wants to appear or not. In this example, however, we have not been given a situation to decide. What we have been given is outcomes in the form of probabilities. Probability of whether he appears the second attempt or does not appear. As a result, what you will again have to do, from A2, you again split into two different routes, two different paths. One where he does not appear, where it will be end outcome, and second path where he appears the second attempt. If he appears in the second attempt, again there will be two outcomes, either he passes or he fails. If he passes, it will be end of the journey, he becomes CA. If he fails, it is not the end of journey yet, because again he'll be allowed the third attempt, and when he decides not to appear the third attempt, it is end of the path over there as a separate outcome. And if he decides to appear, then again two possible outcomes may emerge, either pass or fail, and then your entire tree of outcome will be completed. So let me help you with the later part of this decision tree or tree of outcomes. So attempt 2, there may be two possibilities: appear with a probability of 0.8, does not appear with a probability of 0.2, and over here the node number 3, which is an end outcome, you need to assess the probability of this. Now how would you assess the joint probability of this particular outcome? Do you know? It will be appear in the first, fail in the first, and then do not appear in the second. So this path, basically you have to follow the path. So appear, fail, and do not appear. So 0.9 into 0.35 into 0.2, that will give you probability, or rather I would say joint probability for this end outcome, where he is not qualified or he doesn't become a CA, and the probability of this particular path is 0.063. How did we obtain this? Appear, fail, and then do not appear. That means 0.9 into 0.35 into 0.2. Guys, one thing that you need to follow is the path. Following the path is utmost needed, and all the probabilities that you find in the path keeps getting multiplied till you reach the end. All the end outcomes, when you assess all the end outcomes, once the tree is completed, when you add up the probabilities, that is the joint probabilities of each of the end outcomes, the final result has to be 1. Now, we have reached up to this point that he appears in the second attempt, and again here there can be two outcomes, either pass with a probability of 0.8 or fail with a probability of 0.2. Thereafter, he becomes CA at this particular point. So how would you find the probability of the candidate becoming CA in the second attempt, that is node number 4 or outcome number 4? How do you land up over there? Look at the path again. Appear in the first, fail in the first, appear in the second, and pass in the second. So the joint probability of him becoming CA over here will be appear, fail, appear, pass. 0.9 into 0.35 into 0.8 into 0.8, that would be 0.2016. However, if he fails, it is not the end of the journey. One more chance will be given as attempt number 3, where he can choose either to appear or not appear. Appearing probability 0.7, so does not appear probability will be 0.3. Here it is an end outcome, and to arrive at this where he does not become a CA, follow the path to assess the joint probability. Now how would you arrive at this node number 5 or outcome number 5? If you are starting from here, appear, fail, and then do not appear. So what will be the joint probability of this particular outcome? 0.9 into 0.35 into 0.8 into 0.2 into 0.3. So that would give you an outcome as no CA with a joint probability of 0.01512. If he appears the third attempt, there can be two possible outcomes: either pass with a probability of 0.9 or fail with a probability of 0.1. Now if he passes this exam, that will be again end of the journey and he becomes a CA. So what will be the joint probability of reaching this particular outcome? It will be appear, fail, appear, fail, appear and pass. In other words, appear and fail in the first attempt, then appear and fail in the second attempt, and then appear and pass in the third attempt. So how would you compute the joint probability of this entire path? 0.9 into 0.35 into 0.8 into 0.2 into 0.7 into 0.9, that will give you 0.0311752 as the joint probability of being CA in this third attempt. Now if he fails the exam, it will be again an end outcome. No more chances will be given after this as per the condition given in the example. Now how would you reach over here? Appear in the first, fail in the first, appear in the second, fail in the second, appear third time and again fail the third time. So the entire probability for the entire route, that is a joint probability for this path which leads to outcome number 7, will be appear, fail, appear, fail, appear, fail. That will be 0.9 into 0.35 into 0.8 into 0.2 into 0.7 into 0.1. So that end outcome is no CA with a joint probability of 0.003528. Now look at one thing. Outcome number 1, 3, 5, 7, all odd outcomes where he does not get qualified. Outcome number 2, 4 and 6 are the even outcomes where he is becoming a qualified CA. So basically there are in total 7 possible end outcomes. If you add up the joint probabilities of all these 7 outcomes, it will give you 1 as the total. So probability of being a CA on overall basis will be aggregate of these 3, and probability of not becoming CA will be aggregate of these 4. When you add up this aggregate and this aggregate, it will be obviously 1. I am going to conclude the later part of the answer in a short while, but first you write up this entire tree of outcome. Alright friends, once you have completed writing this entire tree of outcome, let us move ahead and write up the concluding point. Probability of becoming CA will be the aggregate of joint probabilities of those 3 paths which are leading to CA, and that comes to 0.818352. Probability of not becoming CA will be the aggregate of probabilities or joint probabilities of those 4 paths which are leading to no CA, and that aggregate comes to 0.181648. When you take aggregate of these two, it will be exactly 1. So please write these concluding points, and that will be end of the solution. Alright friends, once you have completed writing this entire solution, let us move ahead and take up the next question. That will be question number 26. Let us read this question. A gambler has been given options for playing 3 games of dice as described below. The gambler wins rupees 13,000 if the dice shows 1. Entry ticket for this game is rupees 4,000. Now see, this first game is titled as G1, and the gambler would win 13,000 if the dice shows 1. Now you know one thing, a dice has 6 faces, and if the dice shows 1 will be one of the face out of 6 faces. That means it is implied that the probability that the dice shows 1 will be 1 by 6, and the probability that the dice shows anything other than 1 will be 5 by 6. So the probability of winning game 1 will be 1 by 6. So the probability of losing game 1 will be 5 by 6. Now G2, that is game 2. This game can be played only if game 1 is lost and additional entry ticket of rupees 1000 is purchased. That means if the gambler wants to play game 2, what the gambler will have to do? The gambler will have to first lose game 1 and then buy an additional entry ticket for rupees 1000. And what is the outcome? The gambler wins rupees 11,000 if the dice shows 1 or 2. That means the gambler would win either case when the dice shows 1 or 2. So the probability of any of these two occur will be 2 by 6. In other words, the probability of winning game 2 will be 2 by 6. The probability of losing game 2 will be 4 by 6. Now let us talk about game 3, that is G3. This game can be played only if both of games 1 and 2 are lost and additional entry ticket of rupees 1000 is purchased. The gambler wins rupees 9000 if the dice shows 1, 2, 3 or 4. So look at one thing. When the third game arrives, the probability of winning would increase because the gambler would win if the dice is showing 1, 2, 3 or 4. Means 4 outcomes out of 6 outcomes will be in favor of the gambler. As a result, with game 3, the probability of winning would be 4 by 6. So the probability of losing will be just 2 by 6. Required. Construct a decision tree for the gambler's option. Determine the cumulative cost and cumulative probability of win. Identify the strategy the gambler should adopt. So first of all, you have learned how to present the tree of outcome. Here we will typically call it as a decision tree itself. Why? Because at each point G1, G2, G3, the gambler will have to decide whether she wants to play or she does not want to play. So if the gambler chooses to play, then she can either win or lose. If she chooses not to play, it will be end of the outcome or end of the journey. So you identify all the possible paths, then we identify the probabilities for each outcome and the monetary value of each outcome. Now what happens over here? You have to also answer the last part, that is what will be the gambler's strategy in terms of playing or not playing any particular game. Here at each point G1, G2 and G3, the question does not provide you probability of playing the game or not playing the game. That the gambler has to decide whether she wants to play or she does not want to play. If you are finding the decision making situation where you have to take a decision for the gambler whether the gambler should play or not, it has to be based on EMV, that is expected monetary value. Let me tell you that expected monetary value is computed just in the same way as you compute EVCF. So cash flows of each outcome multiplied by their respective probabilities gives you expected value of cash flows. Same way you compute EMV. So suppose you play or you do not play, what would happen if you play, what would happen if you do not play, the monetary values you identify, and those monetary values will be multiplied to the respective probabilities to get expected monetary value, just like the expected value of cash flow is determined. Now when I ask you to find the monetary value at each point, there has to be a specific approach. Let me not talk about that approach now. Let me first show the decision tree diagram and then I will ask you to use your brain in identifying that. So let us begin with our solution first. We start with the first decision point, that is G1. The gambler can decide either to play or do not play. If the gambler decides not to play, it is end of the journey, right? And the monetary value over here will be 0. because no entry ticket will have to be purchased, no winning, no losing, the monetary value will be 0. If the gambler decides to play, she can either win or lose. If she wins, the probability of winning is 1 by 6. I have already explained you why the probability of winning game 1 will be 1 by 6, because the condition to play game 1 and win it is the dice should show 1. So out of 6 faces of dice, if it is showing 1, the probability will be 1 by 6 to reach this end outcome. So obvious probability for losing game 1 will be 5 by 6. If the gambler wins game 1, that is, if she reaches this outcome point, she will win the cash prize of 13,000, but the cost of playing game 1 is 4,000. The net winnings will be 13,000 minus 4,000, that is 9,000. If she loses game 1, it will not be end of the journey. She will be given one more chance of playing game 2, where she has to decide whether she wants to play or does not play. If she decides not to play, it is end of the outcome, end of the journey, and at this path, the monetary value that she loses is 4,000. So the cash flow or the monetary value that I have identified over here is minus 4,000. Now, if she decides to play, she can either win or lose. For winning, the probability is 2 by 6. So for losing, the probability will be 4 by 6. Once again, let me remind you why the probability over here was 2 by 6. Because the gambler would win when the dice shows either 1 or 2, anything. So 2 outcomes in favor out of 6 total outcomes. So the probability of winning will be 2 by 6, probability of losing will be 4 by 6. If she wins over here, that is game 2, the total prize that is awarded to the gambler is 11,000, but by then the gambler would have spent 4,000 for game 1 and additional 1,000 for game 2. The cumulative cost for the gambler would have been 4 plus 1, 5,000. So out of 11,000 gross winning, if you subtract 5,000, you get 6,000 as the net winnings. Now, if she loses game 2, she will be given one more chance to play game 3. She has to buy one more ticket that will cost her another 1,000 if she decides to play. If she decides not to play, then it will be end of the journey. So if she does not play, it will be end of the journey, and the monetary value for this outcome will be minus 5,000. How we got minus 5,000? It is simply that entry ticket for game 1 was paid 4,000, entry ticket for game 2 was also paid, that is 1,000. So 4 plus 1, 5,000. Cumulative cost up to this stage was 5,000. At G3 decision point, if she decides not to play, her loss will be 5,000. That is why the EMV over here is minus 5,000. On the other side, at G3, if she decides to play, which is the last game allowed, it will be again resulting into 2 possible outcomes: either win with a probability of 4 by 6 or lose with a probability of 2 by 6. If she wins, the cash prize awarded will be in total 9,000, and by then the cumulative cost of playing game 1, game 2, game 3 taken together, the cumulative cost will be 4,000 plus 1,000 plus 1,000, that is 6,000. So 6,000 subtracted out of the winnings of 9,000, the net earnings will be 3,000. And if she loses that game, what she loses in total will be all the price paid for entry ticket, that is 4 plus 1 plus 1, that is 6,000. So these will be 7 end outcomes. Now this is not the end of the solution, this is just a part of the solution. Please neatly draw this decision tree and keep some space vacant over here, because we will be writing something over here. Each decision point EMV you will have to write. So keep some sufficient space over here. Don't make a compact kind of decision tree. Please make it quite big so that you are presenting it very well. On top of that, you have some space to write something in between if required. So please do this writing work and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, I'm sure you have completed writing this entire decision tree. Now what is needed over here? Whether to play game 1 or to play game 2 or to play game 3, whether the gambler should play these games or not, that has to be decided, because from any decision making point going forward, whether to play or not to play is dependent fully on the gambler's decision. Now decision will be based on the monetary values. So suppose I ask you to find the monetary outcome of G1, the first game. If she decides not to play, the monetary value is 0. If she decides to play and win, there is a net winning of 9,000. However, if she plays and loses game 1, then over here what is the monetary outcome that we do not know. In other words, the monetary outcome of G1 will be dependent on G2, and likewise monetary outcome of G2 will be dependent on G3. So you cannot start identifying the EMV or expected monetary value of G1, then G2, then G3. You will have to start from the backward. You will have to first identify the EMV of G3, based on which you will draw the EMV of G2, and based on that you will arrive at the EMV of G1. Now in the decision tree situations, this is called rolling back technique, where you are going from the backward and then you are coming towards the earlier decisions. So you start from the later decisions and then come back to the earlier decisions. That is why it is called rolling back technique. So what I am going to do is I am going to first explain you how to arrive at EMV of G3. Then whatever be the EMV of G3, we will put it over there on the decision tree just next to G3, so that when you are computing the EMV of G2, you get to know what happens when you land up at G3 outcome. There is a defined monetary value for that outcome, and that will make your task easier. Don't forget that you will always have to deal with the later decisions first and the earlier decisions later. So let me show you the calculation approach over here. So let us focus on G3. If the gambler decides to play game 3, there may be two possible outcomes. Either she wins or she loses. If she wins net 3,000 with a probability of 4/6. If she loses, she gets minus 6,000, that is a loss of 6,000 with a probability of 2/6. So you know, these are the two possible monetary values, or rather I would say two possible cash flows with respective probabilities as 4/6 and 2/6. So you know what you have to do for computing EVCF or EMV in this case. 3,000 into its respective probability, that is 4/6, and minus 6,000 into its respective probability, that is 2/6. The final value that you get will be the EMV for the decision of play. For the decision of not playing, the EMV is already defined as minus 5,000. So what you should do, you should first write up a working note heading as expected monetary value or EMV for each decision G1, G2 and G3. But you should remember that we need to get started from G3. So EMV for G3, if played, the outcome will be 3,000 into 4/6 plus minus 6,000 into 2/6, and that would give you 0. You can work it out. Don't just copy the figures, calculate it along with me. 3,000 into 4/6 will give you what? 3,000 into 4, 12,000. 12,000 divided by 6, it is positive 2,000. And minus 6,000 into 2/6 will give you minus 2,000. So positive 2,000, negative 2,000, the final outcome is 0 if played. That means if she decides to play, the monetary value in her hand will be 0. If she decides not to play, then monetary value will be negative 5,000. How we landed up at negative 5,000, I have already explained to you. So we can conclude over here that the gambler compares the EMV of the above two outcomes and decides to have EMV of the decision as 0 or minus 5,000, whichever is beneficial. So between the two, the beneficial outcome is 0. So EMV for G3 is defined as 0, and we conclude that she should play game 3. So I am giving you time, please take note of this entire thing and then we move ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed this entire working, let us go ahead, and now what you do is, at this G3 point, whatever was the EMV identified for G3, we will write it along with G3, that was basically 0. Quickly write this 0 along with G3 and I can then take you ahead. And once you write this 0 over here, now you see you are ready to compute the EMV for G2. Why? Because if the gambler decides not to play, the monetary value as a final outcome is negative 4,000. If she decides to play and win, it is 6,000. If she decides to play and lose, it will be 0. So if she plays, there can be two possible outcomes, win or lose. If she wins net 6,000. If she loses, the EMV for this is 0. So here the monetary value is 0, here the monetary value is 6,000. To land up here, the probability is 4 by 6. To land up over here, the probability is 2 by 6. So 6,000 into 2 by 6 plus 0 into 4 by 6 will be the monetary value if she plays, and the monetary value if she does not play is minus 4,000. So you compare the monetary value of both the decisions, play and do not play, and whichever is beneficial for the gambler, that she would choose for herself with respect to deciding whether game 2 should be played or not. So let me show that calculation to you. EMV for G2, as I explained, if played, it will be 6,000 into 2 by 6 plus 0 into 4 by 6. When you make this calculation, it comes to positive 2,000. If not played, it is a negative 4,000. So obviously, when you compare these two values, positive 2,000 is better than negative 4,000. So we would say the gambler compares the EMV of the above two outcomes and decides to have EMV of the decision as plus 2,000 or minus 4,000, whichever is beneficial, that is positive 2,000. So EMV for G2 is positive 2,000, and we decide the strategy for the gambler that she should play game 2. So please write up this entire working and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed writing this entire working, let's get back to the decision tree diagram, and what we do is, for the G2, whatever was the EMV identified, let us write it over here as plus 2,000. Now this will give you enough input for computing EMV for G1. So now if the gambler decides to play, there can be two possible outcomes, either win or lose. If she wins 9,000. If she loses, the monetary value is positive 2,000. The probability of win is 1 by 6, probability of lose is 5 by 6. So the EMV for play option will be 9,000 into 1 by 6 plus 2,000 into 5 by 6. It will be some good positive value. If she decides not to play, then there is no cash inflow or cash outflow, so EMV of that is 0. So 0 or this positive value, whichever is better. Of course the positive value will be better. So let me show you that calculation, and before I proceed ahead, you make sure that you have noted down this 2000 with a positive sign along with G2. That is important, you should write it. So I'm sure you have written that. So let us go for that working, and that will be EMV for G1. If played, it is 9,000 into 1 by 6 plus 2,000 into 5 by 6. When you make this calculation, it comes to positive 3,167. If not played, the outcome is 0. The gambler compares the EMV of the above two outcomes and decides to have EMV of the decision as 0 or positive 3,167, whichever is beneficial. So obviously it is positive 3,167. So EMV for G1 is positive 3,167, and we say that she should play game 1. So please write up this working as well, and then we move ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed this entire working, don't forget to get back to the decision tree diagram and record the EMV of G1 as positive 3,167. Now the question has also asked you one thing, that you explain what is the cumulative probability of winning and the strategy to be adopted by the gambler. So cumulative probability of winning will depend upon the probability of each individual event, their overall probability, and finally the aggregate of probabilities of these 3 positive outcomes, that is outcome number 2, 4 and 6. So let me explain you how to write up the cumulative probability calculation. You find that the overall probability of winning game 1, it is flat 1 by 6. Now overall probability of winning game 2 will be the probability of losing game 1 multiplied by probability of winning game 2. Now that is something crucial. You need to understand this point very well, that to reach the game 2 point, what is the precondition? What is the condition attached for that? That the gambler must have lost game 1. Then only she can be allowed to play game 2. So what will be the probability of winning game 2? Probability of winning game 2 will be, on overall basis, the probability of losing game 1. To that you multiply the probability of winning game 2. Probability of losing game 1 will be 5 by 6, because the probability of winning game 1 was 1 by 6. So probability of losing game 1 is 5 by 6 multiplied by probability of winning game 2, that will be 2 by 6. So 5 by 6 into 2 by 6 will give you the overall probability of winning game 2. So please carefully make this calculation. So it will be 5 by 6 multiplied by 2 by 6, that will give you 10 by 36. Overall probability of winning game 3. Now here, as I have explained, how will you reach the point of game 3? The gambler will have to lose game 1, she will have to lose game 2, and she will have to win game 3. So the probability of losing game 1 is 5 by 6. Probability of losing game 2 will be 4 by 6, because probability of winning game 2 was 2 by 6. Probability of losing game 2 will be 4 by 6. So 5 by 6 into 4 by 6 into the probability of winning game 3, which itself is 4 by 6. So 5 by 6 into 4 by 6 into 4 by 6, the outcome is 80 by 216. Now these are overall probabilities of winning game 1, game 2 and game 3. So the cumulative probability of winning these games will be aggregate of these 3 overall probabilities, and 1 by 6 plus 10 by 36 plus 80 by 216 would give you in total 176 by 216. If you try to simplify that fraction, it comes to 22 by 27. So the cumulative probability of winning is 22 by 27. When you find that the cumulative probability is substantially higher, this itself gives you a good indication that the gambler has a good chance of winning the games. So gambler should compute all these probabilities before she sits on the table to play the game, because when you know gambling is such an activity, first of all, I don't advocate that, you should never do that. However, if you decide to gamble anyway, then when you sit on the gambling table, you should sit with a positive attitude over there. You should not sit and think. All thinking, all working should be done prior to the game begins. And then when you know that you have to play, you play with an attitude. You lose, but if you win big. It is like that. So all these calculations are supposed to be done before the gameplay begins. During the gameplay, the gambler should be sitting with a positive attitude on the gambling table. So One more thing before I take you ahead. The question has even asked you the strategy. So strategy part, how would you deal? You would just write a concluding line that the gambler should play game 1 because of the EMV. We have decided that already. In fact, for all the 3 games, if you recall, end of the workings of EMV for each decision point, what did we decide? Gambler should play game 3, she should play game 2, she should play game 1. So the strategy that the gambler should adopt, that she should play game 1. If she loses game 1, she should play game 2. If she loses game 2, she should play game 3. Till the game event is over, she should go on playing up to end of these 3 games. Of course, if she wins at any point of time, the exit route is defined. So let us do one thing. I'll first give you some time to note down this cumulative probability calculation, and then we write the strategy concluding part. Alright friends, so once you have written this whole thing, let us move ahead and write those strategies that the gambler should adopt. The gambler should play game 1. If game 1 is lost, she should play game 2. If game 2 is lost, she should play game 3. So please write up this concluding point, and that will be end of the solution. Alright friends, so once you have completed writing this entire solution, let us move ahead and take up another question, that will be question number 27. Let us read this question. Big Oil is wondering whether to drill for oil in Westchester country. The prospects are as follows. Depth of well in terms of feet, they have given 2,000, 4,000, 6,000. Total cost in millions of dollars they have given as 4, 5 and 6. Cumulative probability of finding oil is 0.5, 0.6 and 0.7. And PV of oil, if found, again given in millions of dollars, it is 10, 9 and 8. Draw a decision tree showing the successive drilling decisions to be made by Big Oil. How deep should it be prepared to drill? Whether to 2,000 feet, 4,000 feet or 6,000 feet. Now few things over here. In the previous question, we computed the cumulative cost of playing those games by gambler. But look at this, total cost in millions of dollars. What does that imply? If the company has decided to drill up to 2,000 feet, the cost will be $4 million. If the company decides to drill up to 4,000 feet, the cost will be $5 million. Basically, $5 million will be the overall cost for drilling 4,000 feet. But the cost already incurred up to 2,000 feet was $4 million. So the cost that will be incurred on incremental basis from 2,000 feet to 4,000 feet will be $5 million minus $4 million, that will be $1 million. In other words, cumulative costs are given, the incremental cost you will have to assess. Now the other important point is about cumulative probabilities. Look at one thing, these are the cumulative probabilities. If you directly pick these probabilities and put it in your decision tree diagram, it will be a big error. So be careful about this. Let me explain what exactly I am asking you to do. 0.5 is the cumulative probability of finding oil at 2,000 feet deep. In other words, for finding oil at that depth, the probability is 0.5. For finding oil at 4,000 feet deep, it will be 0.6 as the cumulative probability. That means the incremental probability from 2,000 feet to 4,000 feet will be 0.6 minus 0.5. So the overall probability of finding oil at this stage will be 0.1, correct? From 0.6 you subtract 0.5, you get 0.1. And likewise, again, this 0.7 itself is a cumulative probability. So what you need to understand, friends, that when you have been given cumulative probabilities, you need to draw back the individual or specific probabilities of each event. If you don't do that, directly cumulative probabilities cannot be picked for those individual outcomes of oil found and oil not found. This is the big difference between the earlier question that you have solved and this particular question. If you can plot those probability calculations correctly, then finding EMV for each decision point and deciding whether to drill or not to drill at any given point, it is just as good as the previous question that you have solved. Then there is no brainers required. You have already learned what is the technique to approach the solution ahead. The only difference over here is to breaking down the cumulative probabilities into individual probability of finding oil or not finding oil at each decision point. So let me help you with that part first, and then we can proceed ahead with the solution without any difficulty. So when you begin your solution, you would write the heading as determining probabilities of finding oil at D1, D2 and D3. So cumulative probability for finding oil at D1 is 0.5. So I'm sure you understood the point that D1 indicates 2000 feet, D2 indicates 4000 feet and D3 indicates 6000 feet. So cumulative probability of finding oil at D1 is 0.5. Because D1 is the first point, we would say the probability of finding oil at D1 itself is 0.5. So as it is, 0.5 will be the specific probability of finding oil at D1. In other words, the probability of not finding oil at D1 will be also 0.5. Now, the next thing is very, very important. Carefully understand this. Cumulative probability for finding oil at D2 is given in the question as 0.6. But the cumulative probability of finding oil at D1 was 0.5. So the overall probability for finding oil at D2 will be 0.6 minus 0.5, that will be 0.1. Now, how would you reach at the overall probability of finding oil at D2? You know, overall probability of finding oil at D2, you will extract, you will drill deeper only when you could not find oil at 2000 feet, correct? So probability of not finding oil at 2000 feet multiplied by probability of finding oil at 4000 feet, that will give you the overall probability of finding oil at 4000 feet. And when I'm saying 4000 feet, as per the terms that we have applied over here, it is D2. So let me show that calculation to you. So after writing this much, please write further. The overall probability of finding oil at D2 will be probability of no oil at D1 multiplied by probability of finding oil at D2. So this overall probability of finding oil at D2 is 0.1. So the equation left hand side you will write 0.1, and in the right hand side of the equation it is probability of no oil at D1. So probability of finding oil at D1 is 0.5. So probability of no oil at D1 will also be 0.5. So 0.5 multiplied by probability of finding oil at D2. Now what? If you want to find the probability of finding oil at D2, it will be 0.1 divided by 0.5, and that would give you the specific probability of finding oil at D2, that is 0.2. So please carefully take note of this whole thing. Don't just copy this working. Take your time, understand and note it down. Next question onward, you should not be dependent on me for workings like this. Alright friends, so once you have completed this entire working, let us move ahead and do a similar kind of calculation. Cumulative probability for finding oil at D3 is 0.7. Cumulative probability of finding oil at D2, it was 0.6. Therefore, overall probability of finding oil at D3 will be 0.7 minus 0.6, that is 0.1. And you know one thing, overall probability of finding oil at D3 is probability of no oil found at D1 multiplied by probability of no oil found at D2 and multiplied by probability of finding oil at D3. Now this left hand side of the equation, that is overall probability for finding oil at D3 is 0.1. So left hand side is sorted. Now in the right hand side we have to first consider the probability of no oil found at D1, which will be 0.5, multiplied by probability of no oil found at D2, which will be 1 minus 0.2, that is 0.8, and then this as it is. So it will be 0.5 into 0.8 into probability of finding oil at D3. Are you still wondering from where we got this 0.8? Remember what you have written a few minutes back. The specific probability of finding oil at D2 was 0.2. So probability of finding no oil at D2 will be 1 minus 0.2, that is 0.8. So 0.1 will be 0.4 into probability of finding oil at D3, and therefore specific probability of finding oil at D3 will be 0.1 by 0.4, and that will be 0.25. So please take note of this entire working, and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed writing this entire working, let us move ahead, and now we draw the decision tree diagram. So D1 will be drill up to 2000 feet, and the other choice will be do not drill. Do not drill will be end outcome with zero monetary value. You know it, I don't have to explain it. And if you drill up to 2000 feet, you may find oil with a probability of 0.5, and oil not found will also be having probability of 0.5. If oil found, the end outcome arises where the net monetary value will be positive $6 million. If oil not found, it will not be an end outcome, but you will land up at D2. Now these things I don't have to explain again and again. You have learnt it in earlier questions. So just guidance given to you for making this decision tree diagram, and all the values expressed over here as monetary values are in millions of dollars. Just keep that thing in mind. Now we have again 7 possible outcomes with these monetary values. So monetary values will be 0 if oil is not found. In fact, drilling itself wasn't done over here at the first point itself. But if it was drilled up to 2000 feet and then oil not found, your cumulative cost up to that stage was $4 million. So there will be a loss of $4 million if you stop drilling after 2000 feet. If you continue to drill further, that is from 2000 feet to 4000 feet, the additional cost will be $1 million. That makes your cumulative cost as $5 million. So after 4000 feet of drilling, if you still don't find oil, you will be having loss of $5 million. And if you drill further and still don't find oil, the loss will be $6 million. If you are finding oil at any point of time, it will be the present value of oil found, which is given in the question, minus the cumulative cost up to that stage. So at 2000 feet, it is plus 6, that is plus $6 million. At 4000 feet, it is plus $4 million. And at 6000 feet, it is plus $2 million. Now this is exactly similar to what we have learned in the previous question. After you note down this decision tree diagram, you will have to compute and note down the EMV for each of these 3 decisions of drilling 2000, 4000 or 6000 feet. So first you note down this decision tree diagram, and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed writing this entire network diagram, that is the decision tree diagram, we move ahead and we compute the EMV for each decision D1, D2, D3. I don't have to tell you again that we need to get started from the backward, that is from the latest decision, that will be D3. So EMV for D3, if drilled, it will be $2 million into 0.25 plus minus $6 million into 0.75, it will give you minus $4 million. And if not drilled, the cost on cumulative basis was already $5 million, so loss will be $5 million. So either way you have losses. Now you decide you want to have loss of $4 million or you want to have loss of $5 million. So between these two monetary values, the better one or the beneficial one will be minus 4, of course. So drilling up to 6,000 feet is beneficial, that is minus 4 is the value over there. So the company should drill up to 6,000 feet. That is what we have concluded over here. So quickly write up this working and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed writing this working, what you need to do, you go back to your decision tree diagram and for D3, you identify its EMV as minus 4. Keep in mind one thing, all the positive and negative values that you are plotting over here are in millions of dollars. So for D3, I'm sure you would have written minus 4 already. So let us move ahead and take up the next working, that is EMV for D2. Now I don't have to explain you. If drilled, it would come to negative 2.4 million. If not drilled, it is already computed as minus 4, that is loss of $4 million. Between these two, minus 2.4 is better than minus 4. So we conclude that Big Oil should drill up to 4,000 feet. So write this working quickly and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed writing this entire working, let us move ahead, and first thing that you need to do in your decision tree diagram, you plot minus 2.4 with D2 because now minus 2.4 becomes the EMV for D2. Then once you have written this minus 2.4 over there, you go ahead and make up a working note for computing EMV for D1. If drilled, it would give you a positive monetary value of 1.8. If not drilled, it will be 0. So you compare the two and whichever is beneficial, that is 1.8. So you conclude that Big Oil should drill up to 2,000 feet. So please write up this entire working and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed writing this entire working, let us move ahead. Don't forget to include positive $1.8 million with D1 because now 1.8 becomes the EMV for D1. So you write this and then we go for the concluding point in the solution. The conclusion will be Big Oil company should drill up to 2,000 feet. If oil not found at 2,000 feet, it should drill up to 4,000 feet. If oil not found at 4,000 feet, it should drill up to 6,000 feet. So please write up this whole thing and that will be end of the solution. Alright friends, once you have completed writing this entire solution, let us move ahead and take up one more question for practice. That will be question number 28. Let us read this question. Srinath has been challenged for an IQ test. The test shall have a series of 3 papers named as P1, P2 and P3 with cost of rupees 3 lakhs, rupees 2 lakhs and rupees 1 lakh respectively. P2 can be attempted only on failure of P1. P3 can be attempted only on failure of P2. So these are the conditions mentioned in the question. Given below are the cumulative probabilities of passing papers P1, that is 0.5, P2 is 0.8 and P3 is 0.95. The price to be awarded shall be rupees 10 lakhs for passing P1, rupees 8 lakhs for passing P2 and rupees 7 lakhs for passing P3. You are required to construct a decision tree indicating various outcomes and determine individual probabilities of passing each test. Also determine the EMV for each decision and suggest a strategy that can be adopted for maximizing the benefit. Now friends, one thing different what we find in this particular question, this is about cumulative probabilities being informed and individual probabilities have to be determined. For example, passing the first test, that is P1, the probability is given as 0.5. So whatever is reported as cumulative probability for P1, it will actually be the individual probability as well for passing P1. However, look at one thing, cumulative probability for passing P2 is given as 0.8. When it is cumulative probability, means it is cumulation of 0.5 included in 0.8. So overall probability for passing P2 will be 0.8 minus 0.5, that would be 0.3. And from that you will be separately identifying the probability of passing P2. So please be careful when you are handling with the probability calculation on individual basis. If that goes wrong, the whole solution will go wrong, because probabilities will be the base for computing EMV. Probability calculation should not go wrong. So let me guide you on how to determine those individual probabilities. So for P1 it is very clearly apparent, it is 0.5, but for P2 and P3 be careful. So let us write the calculations for P1 first. Cumulative probability for passing P1 is 0.5. So probability of passing P1 itself will be 0.5. However, when you go to P2, the cumulative probability for passing P2 is 0.8 minus the cumulative probability of passing P1, that is 0.5. The overall probability for passing P2 will be 0.8 minus 0.5, that would give you 0.3. Now, that doesn't mean that the probability of passing P2 is 0.3. This is the overall probability for passing P2. Let us crack this further, and here you need to keep your attention completely at full alert stage. Overall probability of passing P2. Now, how do you follow the path until you pass P2? It is probability of failing P1 multiplied by probability of passing P2. Now, the overall probability for passing P2 will be 0.3, which is difference between these two cumulative probabilities. 0.3 equals to, now we have to take the probability of failing P1. Now look at one thing, if individual probability of passing P1 is 0.5, means the probability of failing P1 will also be 0.5. That means this is 0.5. You keep in mind one thing, 0.5 cannot be ignored, because the condition for writing test P2 is the candidate should have failed test P1. If P1 is passed, then this situation will not arise at all. So failing P1 is a necessity for appearing P2, and then only there comes a question of passing or failing P2. So this 0.3 equals to 0.5 into probability of passing P2, and the specific probability of passing P2 will be 0.3 divided by 0.5, that will be 0.6. So please carefully note down this entire calculation, and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed writing this calculation of probability of passing P2, let us move ahead, and now we compute the similar thing for P3. The cumulative probability for passing P3 is given as 0.95. From this we subtract the cumulative probability of passing P2, we will be getting the overall probability for passing P3. Keep in mind one thing, the overall probability of passing P3 will be probability of failing P1 into probability of failing P2, and then you multiply the probability of passing P3. So keep in mind one thing, the only way that you are allowed to appear P3 is that you should first fail P1, you should also fail P2, and then you should appear and pass P3. That will give you the overall probability of passing P3, which is 0.15. But to reach there, you have to first multiply the probability of failing P1, then multiply the probability of failing P2, and then you get the probability of passing P3. So we start with the left hand side of the equation, that is overall probability for passing P3, that is 0.15, which will be 0.5, that is the individual probability of failing P1, 0.4, that is the individual probability of failing P2, and multiplied by the specific or individual probability of passing P3. So if you want to solve this equation, you will be getting 0.15 equals to 0.2 into probability of passing P3. So the specific probability of passing P3 will be 0.15 divided by 0.2, and that would give you 0.75. So please don't rush up and copy what I have displayed on screen. Understand and write it down systematically. Alright friends, once you have computed the specific probability of passing P1, P2, P3, one task is done. Now you are ready to prepare the decision tree. P1, you may decide to appear or do not appear. If you do not appear, it is an end outcome with 0 as the monetary value of that outcome. If you appear, there can be two possibilities. Either you pass, where the probability of pass is 0.5, or you fail, so the probability of fail will also be 0.5. If you pass, you will be awarded a prize of 10 lakhs, but the price that you paid for appearing test P1 was 3 lakhs, so the net cash flow in your hand will be 7 lakhs. Now, if you fail P1, you don't come to an end outcome, you in fact come to another decision making situation, that is whether you should appear for P2 or not. Therefore, depending upon the decision of the candidate, there can be two possible outcomes: either appear the test P2 or do not appear. If the candidate does not appear test P2, it is an end outcome and the cash flow is defined over here as minus 3 lakhs. This is basically the cost what the candidate has paid for test P1, and then after failing test P1, if he decides that he doesn't want to appear test P2, 3 lakhs will be his overall loss. On the other side, if he decides to appear, there can be two possible outcomes: either pass with a probability of 0.6 or fail with a probability of 0.4. If he passes, he will be getting a cash prize of 8 lakhs minus the cumulative cost of both the test P1 and P2, which will be 3 lakhs and 2 lakhs, summing up to 5 lakhs. So 5 lakhs subtracted from 8 lakhs will give him the net cash inflow of 3 lakhs. On the other side, on failing the test P2, it is not an end outcome, but it is another chance given as P3, which will be the last chance. So the candidate may decide either to appear the test P3 or do not appear. If he decides not to appear, then it's an end outcome with a total loss of 5 lakhs. From where did we get this 5 lakhs loss? The cumulative cost of test P1 and P2 taken together, but P3 cost is not included because he has decided not to appear for P3. Then the cost overall up to this stage will be 5 lakhs only, which will become a loss if he decides not to appear P3. On the other side, if he decides to appear P3, there can be two possible outcomes. One is pass with a probability of 0.75 or fail with a probability of 0.25. If he passes, he gets a cash award of 7 lakhs, but the cumulative cost up to these 3 tests is 6 lakhs. So 7 lakh minus 6 lakh, the net cash flow will be 1 lakh. And if he fails that test, the entire cumulative cost incurred up to this stage will be a loss. So please carefully take note of this entire decision tree diagram, and then we proceed ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed writing this entire decision tree diagram, let us move ahead and now we determine the EMV, that is expected monetary value for each decision P1, P2 and P3. We always begin with P3. You know that we follow a rolling back technique where we have to approach from the backward. So if P3 appeared, what will be the outcome? Either a cash flow of 1 lakh positive or a cash flow of 6 lakh negative. 1 lakh cash flow positive will have probability of 0.75. 6 lakh cash flow negative will have probability of 0.25. The expected monetary value of P3 if appeared is minus 75,000. If not appeared, it is clearly minus 5 lakhs. So Srinath will compare the EMV of the above two outcomes, that is minus 75,000 or minus 5 lakhs. Because both are negative values, the lower negative value will be preferred. So whichever is beneficial, that is minus 75,000. So the conclusion is he should appear for P3. So do one thing, before I take you any further, you write up this entire working and then we plot this EMV into the decision tree. Alright friends, once you have completed writing this entire working, let us move ahead and plot the EMV of P3 in the decision tree diagram. Diagram you have already made, just write this minus 75,000 over here with P3. Why we need this? Because when we have to take up the calculation of EMV for P2, for the appear part, if the candidate is passing, we know the monetary value. If he is failing, that time we were not aware of the monetary value. Therefore, EMV of P3 is now clearly identified. Now, based on this amount available, you can compute the EMV of P2 and accordingly you will be able to take the decision further. So, I am sure you have written this minus 75,000 over here. Let us move ahead and now we compute EMV for P2. Same way, if appeared, it will be 3 lakhs into 0.6 plus minus 75,000 into 0.4, which is giving you 1,50,000, and if not appeared, there will be a loss of 3 lakhs. You know it how, correct? So if appeared, if not appeared, between the two, obviously positive 1,50,000 is better than negative 3 lakhs. So we would say Srinath compares the EMV of the above two outcomes and decides to have EMV of the decision as positive 1,50,000 or negative 3 lakhs, whichever is beneficial, that is positive 1,50,000, and we conclude that he should appear for P2. Please write up this entire working and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed writing this working, let's get back to the decision tree diagram, and for the P2, whatever be the expected monetary value that we have identified based on whether he should appear or not. So we have concluded that he should appear because the EMV for P2 that way was better, positive 1,50,000. So that will be something that you should write up with your decision tree diagram. Please write this 1,50,000 so that when we have to compute the EMV for P1, the task will be very simple. If appeared, there may be two outcomes, pass or fail. Pass and fail, each of these outcomes have probability of 0.5. So the EMV if appeared will be 7 lakhs into 0.5 plus 1,50,000 into 0.5. Correct? If not appeared, then it is 0. Then we compare that EMV with 0 and we will see whichever is better and accordingly take the decision. So let us move ahead and write up that working. EMV for P1, if appeared, it will be 7 lakhs into 0.5 plus 1,50,000 into 0.5, which gives you 4,25,000. If not appeared, it will be 0. Srinath compares the EMV of the above two outcomes and decides to have EMV of the decision as positive 4,25,000 or 0. So whichever is beneficial for him, it will be 4,25,000. He should appear for P1 is the outcome. So please write up this entire thing and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, once we have completed this entire working, we get back to the decision tree diagram and we write up the EMV for P1 as 4,25,000. So just write that, and one thing that is left over is we need to write up the concluding strategy. So let us move to that last part. Strategy to be adopted by Srinath. It will be suggesting that Srinath should appear for P1. If he fails in P1, he should appear for P2. If he fails in P2, he should appear for P3. So please write up these concluding lines, and that will be end of the solution.